Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is session 7 of 8. You're almost across the finish line, and this is probably the first week that we have a exit of most of our snowbirds, but we have a few left over here. As rates will change, right? Come Friday, isn't it Saturday morning? Whenever spring break rates will begin. I'm going to sit down tonight because I'm kind of I'm been sick. So, was I here Sunday? Good. I don't remember it. So, wow, good. All right. I'm glad to hear. I'll have to go back and watch for my own sake. I don't. Well, I know I'm not contagious at this point, but please stay away from me. I am recovering from the flu. So, yeah, it was worse than I thought. So, anyway, hey, let's get right to the quiz here. And there's a lot of. It sounds funny to say this. We've studied the Bible a lot over these 7 weeks, but we're going to read a lot of the Bible tonight as we get into Jacob's story. But we'll recount from Isaac from last week first with our infamous quiz. So, question number 1: Isaac had an older half brother. What was his name? Ishmael. Call me Ishmael. That's right. Number 2, the episode in Genesis 22 involving Abraham and Isaac is known in Judaism as the what? The binding of Isaac. That's right. The binding of Isaac. The binding of Isaac. We often call it the sacrifice of Isaac, but he was not sacrificed. He escaped. Number 3, Soren Kierkegaard wrote about the faith of Abraham, and he referred to it as a suspension of the what? Ethical. That's it, right. That's exactly right. He talked about it as the suspension of the ethical. Number 4, Yitz Greenberg summarizes the Jewish interpretation of Genesis 22 by saying, the story of Isaac symbolizes the prohibition to worship God by blank sacrifices at a time when it was the norm. Human or child sacrifices. That's exactly right. Number 5, until 2018, the Royal Cemetery of Blank held the largest known depository of religiously sacrificed children. Abraham's hometown. Number 6, Ben Hinnom in the Old Testament was transliterated to become Gehenna in the New Testament and translated as what usually? Hell, just hell. That is the most common word for hell in the New Testament. Gehenna. Jerusalem's trash dump is what it would become by the time of the New Testament. Number 7, where is Mount Moriah located?
The temple.
It is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, where the Dome of the Rock sits today. Number 8, Abraham arranged Isaac's wedding to a woman outside of Canaan. To whom was Isaac married? Rebekah. She's going to be a major player tonight as we talk about Jacob. And number 9, Isaac was the father of 2 sons, twin boys. Do you know their names? Esau and Jacob. Jacob and Esau. And then number 10, the name Jacob means what? Heel grabber. I love that. One who causes others to stumble. He's a trickster. He's a hustler. He's a shyster. He's a lot of things. So, and we're going to talk about him tonight. But before we get into Jacob, as has been the case, I have a few follow-up questions from the last time that we gathered. It's probably why I had the flu last Wednesday night. I was not with you because I was, at this very moment, witnessing the 92-year-old Marvel Willie Nelson playing in St. Augustine. So that's probably why I got the flu. So there you go. Question 1, if you answered this, I missed it, but if original sin is as you say, and Adam made it possible for us to sin, then when do we become sinners? It's a very good question. I don't know if I answered it before, but I'm going to answer it again. As you know, I was raised Baptist and escaped, but a lot of my Baptist free Protestant upbringing is still a large part of my theology. And I never really thought about, when you're raised in one tradition, you don't think about how necessarily how other traditions view things. And I was a Baptist pastor in a small town, big Baptist church, small town, just down the street from the only Catholic church in town. 100 Baptist churches, one Catholic church. And what was that? Oh, you're taking a picture over there. Okay. And so that Catholic congregation and my congregation, we would have dinner together a couple times a year. And we would have dinner, and then we would, Father Thad Rudd and I would field theological questions for about 30 minutes after dinner, and people mixing and talking and about the different ways to be Christian. And it was in those, and I was young, very young then, but it was in those discussions that I realized how big a deal original sin is in the Augustinian tradition. Because the question that would always come up would be, why don't you believe in original sin? And I would say, well, I do believe in original sin. And then the follow-up question was always, well, you don't baptize babies. And here I am with a Bible college and a master's degree in theology, and it just I never connected the dots that it was that big of a deal coming from that tradition. And so even to this day, I don't baptize babies. I'll dedicate a child, but I don't baptize a baby. And I tell the parents that. Because I'm not Augustinian in my view of original sin. I believe in original sin. I don't believe in original guilt. Catholicism and much of magisterial Reformation, think Presbyterian. We'll just use that as a handle on the suitcase. Have an Augustinian view of original sin. Thus, something has to happen very early to get rid of that original sin, which is infant baptism. Wash that away quick. And the Baptist view, and for many other free groups, has been, believe it or not, much closer to the Jewish view. When a 12-year-old Jewish boy has a bar mitzvah, or in the Western world, they don't necessarily do this in the East, but in the Western world, a bat mitzvah for a girl, what that means is that child, it's a rite of passage. The child is becoming an adult, and bar mitzvah means son of the law. So when they have a bar mitzvah, they are saying, this person, this child, is now responsible before God for his or her moral choices. So it's and there was a great phrase that we used in the Baptist world, the age of accountability was a phrase that got tossed around, and nobody really knew what that age was. But the point being is that at some point in your life, you obtain the knowledge of good and evil, to use Eden's words. You obtain the ability to choose between right and wrong. And the short answer would be, we become sinners when we obtain that ability, because never has a human lived that has always chosen correctly. There you go. That's the short answer. So Catholicism and Reformed theology would say, from the very beginning, other Christian theologies, Jewish theology would say, at the stage that a person can become conscious of their decisions that they are making. And it's a massive theological difference. And it affects theology from the very beginning going forward. So I don't know if I answered that completely in the past, but there it is for tonight. And then question 2 is related to this. How is it that Augustine was so influential? I've said when we studied Paul, when we studied the history of Christianity in this study, when we studied how, one winter we studied about how the Bible came to be in the way that it is, I've said in every one of those gatherings that Augustine is the most influential theologian to have ever lived to this day, outside of the Apostle Paul. If you want to say who has had more influence on the Jesus movement, Paul and then Augustine. And the answer, as I understand it, would be in 3 parts here. First, Augustine was the first theologian to write systematically. There was no systematic theology that existed before Augustine. When I talk about systematic theology, I'm talking about a comprehensive way to look at the world. You would have writers that would write about Jesus, and you'd have writers that would write about God, or write about the church, or write about sin. Augustine got his arms around all of that and wrote a comprehensive view of what Christian theology was. So he was the first one to do that. And 2, he was the first one to redeem the classics. And by that I mean he brought Plato and Greek philosophy into Christianity. He was the first to do that. So he picked up the elements of the soul and the afterlife and proved to the world that Christianity could be a robust intellectual movement, not just a religion. And then third, he was in the right place at the right time. He lived between the first 2 great councils of the church. So he was born after the New Testament church had decided what the New Testament was going to be. So before him, when people wrote about theology, they weren't even sure what all the Bibles of the New Testament were. But by Augustine, that was a set order. So he was dealing with a set book. He was also a little distance from Rome, and so Rome was being battered by waves of barbarians. He was in northern Africa, so he was safe. And it was also by this time Christianity was the religion of the land. And so when you're not having to run for your life all the time, you can sit down and think about things. And that's what he did, and he did it very well. And then when Rome collapsed during his lifetime, the church filled that vacuum. And for 800 years, the church really served as the social system of order. And it was Augustine's thoughts that held that up. So the reason that he's most influential, it's a long answer, but there was just nobody else. He is this giant oak that grows up and takes up so much space and sunshine that nothing else can grow up around him. And he's the most influential theologian until Thomas Aquinas, 800 years later. And that's why his influence is as strong as it is. Question 3, with the 3 different times that Abraham and Isaac hid their wives' identities, we talked about that the last couple of weeks, couldn't it be just that they were beautiful instead of a message to the post-exile community? Absolutely. If you take those passages literally, they were hiding their wives because they were beautiful. If you take those passages literally, you have to also recognize that they're not 25-year-old women either. If you take them literally, Sarah's being hidden well past her 85th birthday. So I have the bias that Genesis is written to the post-exile community. That's my bias, and I'll call it that. Other biases lead to other conclusions. We all read the Bible with a bias, with an angle. Everybody. Well, I just take it for what it says. Nobody does that. That's impossible. That is impossible. Because you take the Bible, you read the Bible based on your personal experiences and your place in the world. And there's no place to stand. There's a place to stand where you can get more clarity, but there's no place to stand where you say this is absolutely objective, because we're all immersed in it in the present time. Question 4, you said when God commanded Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, it was opportunity to hear a better word from a better God. This actually came from my sermon the other Sunday. couldn't this be taken as permission to disobey God? I won't tell you who asked this question, but I could kiss this person's face. This, with the flu. No, I'm kidding. This is a wonderful question. Yes, it could be taken as permission to disobey God. A commandment that is immoral should be interrogated. If you hear a religious commandment, whether it's from a pulpit or from a voice or from a book, and it is unethical, that commandment needs to be wrestled with. And my perspective here is that God came to Abraham to do something completely different. Human sacrifice was coming to an end. This will not happen again in the name of God, not Israel's God. And so the commandment is an invitation, and this is built on the Jewish interpretation. It's not my interpretation. The commandment is an opportunity for Abraham to enter into dialogue with God. Okay, we know you can obey, but do you really know the God with whom you've had this relationship? This God that has called you thus far, would He really ask you to do this? And so it is this give and take. I'll give you a little parable that might help. During World War II, a young woman knocks on the door of a church in Eastern Europe. The priest opens the door. There she stands and she begs for safety. She's a young Jewish woman from a neighboring village. The priest takes her in. He knows he has a problem, and so he calls his council together and says, I've taken in this young Jewish woman. What should we do? Because they're going to be looking for her. And the council says, well, let's read the Bible and pray about it. And they do. And they come back and the council says, keeping this woman here in the church will endanger the entire village. The Gestapo could murder everyone in this village because we are sheltering this one woman. And the Bible says that we must respect the authorities of the land because they are exercising the authority of God. Romans 13. And the priest says, the Bible also says that as you do unto the least of these, you have done it unto me. So they said, well, let's pray some more. So they pray some more. And they come back together and they're really torn. And they say, oh, if only God could speak to us right now like He spoke to Moses and Abraham and everybody in the Old Testament. And suddenly there's a light in the room. And God speaks. And God says to the priest, my dear son, the council is right. You must obey the authorities in the land. The woman must be surrendered. And the priest says, well, Lord, in order to be faithful to your word, I will have to disagree. Because you have told me that I must take care of the least of these as if I were taking care of you. And God laughs and said, that's what I meant. And the light disappears. It's that's based on actually a Hasidic parable about when it's time to wrestle out conflicting issues, you got to wrestle it out. And you got to listen very closely for the voice of God. And it's a dynamic thing. And so that's sort of my long answer to those questions. Well, speaking of wrestling, on to Jacob we go, who could defy God better than most. Jacob gets 10 or so chapters of Genesis as the main character, and he lingers as a secondary character all the way to the end of the book, more than 20 chapters. You could say that Jacob is the main character of the book of Genesis, even more so than his grandfather, Abraham. He's a real big deal. So I thought I would look at Jacob from three perspectives tonight. His early life, his family of origin, because that's what sets him on the path that he takes. His encounters with God, there are a number of these that are quite significant. And then the extended family of Jacob. From him will spring the 12 tribes of Israel, and they are very dysfunctional. If you come from a dysfunctional family, have I got good news for you tonight? It cannot be any worse than what you're going to see with Jacob and some of the things that he does with his family. We turn to the early life of Jacob. We go to Genesis 25 for Jacob's birth and the drama that will carry him forward. Most of your pages tonight are just scripture text, which is great. Plenty of room to take notes, and I'll stop and we'll take questions at all. If my voice starts to fail, I'm going to put Braden and Garrett on alert back there. They have a microphone, and I may have you read a couple paragraphs of the text if you would be so kind. They're just giving me the blank stare back there. All right. So Genesis 25, picking up at verse number 24. And when the time came to give birth, Rebekah discovered that she did indeed have twins. The first one was very red at birth and covered with thick hair like a fur coat. So they named him Esau. And then the other twin was born with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So they named him Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born. And we're returning to where we left off last time we were together. Esau means hairy. Not Harry, but Hairy. But you can call him Harry. He's a little wild animal. And being the firstborn, the hereditary ancestry title should fall to him. But it won't. Just as the title did not fall to Ishmael, it fell to Isaac. And Jacob means, you've already discovered on your quiz, heel grabber, the trickster, he who causes others to stumble. He's a little sneaky, he's a little conniving, he's a hustling upstart, and it will be Jacob who will become the son of promise. He is born into the world already grasping at whoever is ahead of him to pull them back to get ahead, is the idea that the biblical writer wants you to have. And it is an underdog theme. And it's this way throughout the entire Old Testament. It won't be Cain, it'll be Seth. In rabbinical interpretation, it won't be Japheth, Noah's son, it'll be Shem. Not Haran, but Abraham. Not Ishmael, but Isaac. Not Esau, but Jacob. Not Reuben, which would be Jacob's oldest, but Judah, who is a very questionable character. Not the 7 older sons of Jesse, but the baby boy, David, would become king. David has about 18 children, and it's Solomon way down the line who would become king. So it's a constant underdog story. And this, again, is written to the remnant, to those who have survived the exile, because they are few, they are weak, they are marginalized, they are not in power, they are the little sibling. And so all the Old Testament is directed at those who are largely powerless, the underdog. It's an underdog's story. So we go on, pick up at verse 27. As the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter. He was an outdoorsman, but Jacob had a quiet temperament, preferring to stay at home. Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating the wild game Esau brought home. But Rebekah loved Jacob. We've got trouble already, don't we? One day when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau arrived home from the wilderness, exhausted and hungry. Esau said to Jacob, "I'm starved. Give me some of that red stew." And I love the parenthesis here. This is how Esau got his other nickname, Edom, which means red. Red and hairy. He's got great nicknames. Verse 31, "All right," Jacob replied, "but trade me your rights as the firstborn son." "Look, I'm dying of starvation," said Esau. "What good is my birthright to me now?" But Jacob said, "First you must swear it." So Esau swore an oath, thereby selling all his rights as the firstborn to his brother Jacob. And then Jacob gave Esau some bread and lentil stew. So a couple things to notice about the text. Yes, Esau is an idiot. That's exactly right. That was what Doug just said. I can't hear much, but I heard that, Doug. He is impulsive, he is impatient, he is not very bright. Notice that first. Notice, too, that the two boys, though twins, could not be any different. They are radically different. Number three, the parents are playing favorites. The rivalry is set somewhat beyond their abilities. And then four, Jacob is an opportunist. And why I love how Frederick Buechner talks about this passage. And he says, and why shouldn't he be? Whenever someone stupid comes along, they get taken advantage of. And that's, to your point, Doug, Esau is just giving it away. Very, very impulsive. And what he has given away is this birthright. In ancient times, well, not just in ancient times, this would square with the 21st century in many cases. To be the firstborn son was to be all there was. In ancient times, the firstborn son was the one who received the birthright. That means, and this would get canonized later in the Levitical law, he would get double inheritance. In other words, they split the inheritance down the middle, and the birthright son gets half, and the other half is divided amongst all the other brothers. It's a pretty big deal. And then, as the oldest and as the birthright son, he would then be responsible for the family. So if his father died and he was young or had siblings that were younger, he then became responsible to make sure all the daughters, his sisters, married properly. He inherited the family property, the family name, the family business, the family responsibilities that went along with it. And so, in ancient times, especially even more than today, this was a very big deal. So when Esau trades his away for a bowl of soup, he really is an idiot. He's giving away a massive fortune by all accounts. And more than that, he's giving away the place of honor, the place of standing in the family.
Just a quick question. It's somewhere in the Bible, it says God says that he loved Jacob, but he
Hated Esau.
Esau.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of strong words coming from a guy who was just loved.
Right? Right.
Is there
It's to absolutely drive the contrast home that Jacob, Israel, is the chosen race. I won't get into it tonight, but just give you a point. Esau, when he realizes, as the story unfolds, he knows that he gave it away, but then he also gets robbed. Because it's one thing for them to make the deal, but it's Isaac's place to give the blessing. It's still Isaac's will. And when Esau gets the short end of the stick, he goes immediately and marries into Ishmael's family. The double entendre here. And Muhammad, centuries later, would embrace that as well. So it's very distinct, nationalistic, tribal language. This is the chosen race versus this race. It's a very good question. Down to Genesis 27. We move forward several years. One day when Isaac was old and turning blind, he called for Esau, his oldest son. I'm an old man now, Isaac said, and I don't know when I may die. Go out into the open country to hunt me some wild game for me. Prepare my favorite dish and bring it for me to eat. Then I will pronounce the blessing that belongs to you, my firstborn son, before I die. Here it is. He's signing the will. He's not just signing the will. He's literally signing the trust and handing it over. But Rebekah overheard what Isaac said to his son Esau. So when Esau left to hunt for the wild game, she said to her son Jacob, "Listen, go out to the flocks, bring me 2 fine young goats. I'll use them to prepare your father's favorite dish. Then take the food to your father so he can eat it and bless you before he dies." Then Rebekah took Esau's favorite clothes, which were there in the house, and gave them to her younger son Jacob. She covered his arms and the smooth part of his neck with the skin of the young goats. Then she gave Jacob the delicious meal, including freshly baked bread. The way to a man's heart is through his stomach. So Jacob took the food to his father, and he said, "It's Esau, your firstborn son. I've done as you told me. Here is the wild game. Now sit up and eat it so you can give me your blessing." He's a little bold, right? He's a little forward. Isaac asked, "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" And Jacob replied, bold-faced lie, "The Lord your God put it in my path." Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Come closer so I can touch you and make sure that you are really Esau." I love the drama of this chapter. So Jacob went closer to his father, and Isaac touched him. I love this. The voice is Jacob's, but the hands are Esau's, Isaac said. But he did not recognize Jacob because Jacob's hands felt hairy just like Esau's. So Isaac prepared to bless Jacob. But before, we'll look one more time. "But are you really my son Esau?" "Yes, I am," Jacob replied. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Well, then come a little closer and kiss me, my son." So Jacob went over and kissed him, and when Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he was finally convinced. And he blessed his son. And he said, "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of the outdoors, which the Lord has blessed. From the dew of heaven and the richness of the earth, may God always give you abundant harvests of grain and bountiful new wine. May many nations become your servants, and may they bow down to you. May you be the master over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. All who curse you will be cursed. All who bless you will be blessed." As soon as Isaac, which is really a beautiful blessing, by the way. It is a beautiful blessing. If you're like, I need something to, my friend's got a new baby and they want me to pray a blessing, go get that one right there. It's really good. As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and almost before Jacob had left his father, Esau returned from his hunt. Esau prepared a delicious meal and brought it to his father. And then he said, "Sit up, my father, and eat my wild game so you can give me your blessing." But Isaac said, "Who are you?" And Isaac replied, "It's your son, your firstborn son, Esau." Isaac began to tremble uncontrollably and said, "Then who just served me wild game? I've already eaten it, and I blessed him just before you came, and that blessing must stand." From that time on, Esau hated Jacob because their father had given Jacob the blessing. And Esau began to scheme, "I will soon be mourning my father's death. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." But Rebekah heard about Esau's plans, so she sent for Jacob and told him, "Listen, Esau is consoling himself by plotting to kill you. So listen carefully." She tells Jacob 4 different times, "Listen. Get ready and flee to my brother Laban in Haran." You have a map there for you about where that's located. "Stay there with him until your brother cools off. When he calms down and forgets what you have done to him, I will send for you to come back. Why should I lose both of you in one day?" I'll draw your attention to just a couple of things and then questions that you might have. Number 1, Rebekah is the antagonist. Rebekah is as good a schemer as her son in this sense. It doesn't mean that Jacob is innocent. Jacob is the one who's already stolen. Remember the soup lunch deal? And don't you know that he told his mother about that? So Rebekah is the antagonist here, but he's a willing accomplice. And number 2, Isaac, no pun intended, was really close to sniffing out the plot. Do you know they just keep "Who are you?" And you can just bless him. I mean, you feel sorry for him. He's a tottering old man who's lost his sight. He's stuck in the back of a canvas tent, and he just wants a good meal. And he's taken terrible advantage of in this position. 3, Rebekah sends Jacob back to modern Syria where she was born to protect him. And then what's really striking is that Rebekah knew she had lost Esau that day. Why should I lose both of you in one day? She knows what she has done. She and Esau, you never find them speaking to one another ever again. The family, in that sense, is broken at that point. Esau would not kill his mother. He would kill his brother. But his hatred toward his mother is equal, because there's no doubt that Jacob could not have pulled it off alone. He needed some help. It's a fairly straightforward story. It's good and dramatic. It's comical at times. Being a second-born twin myself, I have often read this story with great pleasure. And I can actually see myself in both characters. The rivalry with twins is real in a family. And it's not unusual, even if you're identical, for twins to be very different from one another. And so this story is always, since the first time I heard it as a little boy, it's always resonated with me. And I didn't even have to read it. I could have almost told it to you by heart. I've read it so many times, but it's very, again, if you're looking for propaganda, don't go to Genesis. Jacob looks awful right here. Isaac looks, another good Yiddish word. Isaac looks like a schmuck, and Rebecca looks so conniving, and you feel sorry for Esau, but he's so stupid. It's just so human, right? It's just so human what you see playing out in these chapters. Quick questions. Yeah. That's great, Mickey. That's great. Maybe people aren't the comment is about, maybe they're not as dumb as they appear. Esau or Isaac. Maybe Isaac knows. I mean, Anna said it so well Sunday. Depending upon how you tell the story, depends on where the story goes. I mean, we generally tell this story from Jacob's perspective because we know he ends up being the hero. But if you tell it from Esau's perspective, it's really painful. If you tell it from Isaac's perspective, and remember what I said 2 weeks ago? What if Isaac, I just threw this out there because I couldn't forget it. What if Isaac is neurodivergent? What if he's autistic? Literally. Because if you look at Isaac, he's the minor character of the 3 great patriarchs. He doesn't marry till he's well past 40. He's so dedicated to his mother. Rebecca runs the household. He's not a warrior. He's not a fighter. He never wanders. That there is this minority interpretation that something emotionally, mentally limits Isaac. Which, again, if you tell the story that way, you begin to feel sorry for him to be taken advantage of this way. So there's so much. We don't have time to go into all that. But you're right. I mean, if you read it, don't read these stories like, "Thus saith the Lord." Read it like that. But read it like you're there. Read it and like I said, I'm a twin. I've read that story my entire life with Esau as my sister. She's not nearly that dumb. But to feel that competition, to feel the rivalry, I know that. It's just natural. You come to read this and think about one of your siblings. We don't have to work very hard to think about our parents in this scenario. How many times has a child said, well, you love him more than you love me? You're playing favorites, right? That happens in every family. This was actually going on here. And it just makes it so earthy and real, and it's much more an immersive experience than, we're going to read through these verses looking for some great doctrine. This is not a doctrinal passage. This is outstanding writing, and it really pulls us in. Real quickly, let's get to the encounters of Jacob, his encounters with God. Encounter number 1 is Genesis chapter 28. Now, he's on the run now. His mother has sent him to her uncle in modern-day Syria, almost to Turkey, a long way away. And this is Jacob's Ladder, or if you prefer, Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. This is the passage that inspired the song, just so you know. Jacob left Beersheba and traveled toward Haran. At sundown, he arrived at a good place to set up camp, stopped for the night. Jacob found a stone to rest his head against and lay down to sleep. As he slept, he dreamed of a stairway that reached from the earth to heaven, and he saw the angels of God going up and down the stairway. At the top of the stairway stood the Lord, Yahweh. See the all caps? And he said, I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham and the God of your father Isaac. The ground you are lying on belongs to you. I am giving it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth. They will spread out in all directions, to the west and to the east, to the north and the south, and all the families of the earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. What's more, I am with you. I will protect you wherever you go. One day I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have finished giving you everything I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place. I wasn't even aware of it. But he was also afraid and said, what an awesome place this is. It is none other than the house of God, the very gateway to heaven. He took the stone he had rested his head against. He set it upright as a memorial pillar. Then he poured olive oil all over it, olive oil being something that you really labored for. You didn't just go buy it off the shelf. It's very valuable, so he pours out the most valuable thing that he has. And he named that place Bethel, which means house of God. More accurately would be Bethel. You go to Israel, and if you say, where do you go to church? And you say, I go to the Bethel Baptist Church. They mock you because it's Bethel. Beth means house, El means God. Bethlehem, house of bread. Bethel, house of God. And that's the name that Jacob gives it. Abraham, his grandfather, had already made sacrifices to God in the exact same place, at least 2 times before. And this is the place early on before the temple was built and before Jerusalem became the capital of Israel, that the Ark of the Covenant was kept here at Bethel because of its importance with the patriarchs and the ancestors. The Celts would call Bethel a thin place where heaven and earth come together. And like the distance between heaven and earth is not very much. Heaven kind of leaks down into earth, a holy place. Encounter 2 is some 20 years later, the text I spoke from on Sunday. Jacob has been living away from the promised land, living with his uncle. He is married a couple times. He didn't divorce, he just kept adding. He has a couple of concubines. He has 11 sons. He has numerous daughters. He's become a very prosperous man, but it's time to go home. And his brother Esau is waiting for him on the other side of this stream, the river, the stream of Jabbok. And they have not seen each other in 20 years since Jacob ran for his life. And now he's coming home. And we pick up the reading at verse 3. Then Jacob sent messengers ahead to his brother Esau, who was living in the region of Seir in the land of Edom. Edom means what? Red. He's living in his own territory there. He told them, give this message to my master Esau. That is the correct language to use at this point in the game. Humble greetings from your servant Jacob. Until now I have been living with Uncle Laban, And now I own cattle and donkeys, flocks of sheep and goats, and many servants, both men and women. I have sent these messengers to inform my Lord of my coming, hoping that you will be friendly to me. No joke. After delivering the message, the messengers returned to Jacob and reported, "We met your brother Esau. He is already on his way. He has an army of 400 men with him." Jacob, understatement, was terrified at the news. So what he does at this point is he begins to divide up his family. Sends sons and wife in one direction, sends sons and a wife in another direction, sends some flocks over here. His thinking is, if I get attacked, Esau concentrate on one group and maybe we can, counter fight with. Just don't stay together. Let's divide and conquer. Next slide, if you would. We drop down to verse 22. During the night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 servant wives, and his 11 sons, and crossed the Jabbok River with them. And after taking them to the other side, he sent over all his possessions. This left Jacob all alone in the camp, and a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. And when the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of his socket. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" the man asked. And he replied, "Jacob." "Your name will no longer be Jacob," the man told him. "From now on you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won." "Please tell me your name," Jacob said. "Why do you want to know my name?" the man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there. Jacob named the place Peniel, which means face of God, for he said, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared." The sun was rising as Jacob left Peniel, and he was limping because of the injury to his hip. It's just, I spent 25 minutes with it Sunday, so I won't go back into it today. But it's just an extraordinary passage. Is it literal? Is it figurative? Is it God? Is it God's representative? Is it his subconscious? Is it actually, some of the rabbis say it's actually Esau? There's a lot going on. You could study this passage the rest of your life and not exhaust it. It is beautiful. And it is left ambiguous on purpose so that we can do a lot of different things. Again, Anna, how you tell that story depends, where you start depends on where that story would unfold. But it is truly, finally, the U-turn, the turnaround in Jacob's life. This is the first time that he actually is honest. What is your name? It's God's way of forcing him to make his confession. Out with it. Who are you? What is it that you do? What kind of person are you? And he has to confess that. And then, once he's honest, it's like the first step in AA. He gets honest, surrenders to a higher power, and everything about his life changes at this point. And he goes in a completely different direction. I won't leave you hanging. This is Genesis 33, picking up at verse 3. Then Jacob went on ahead. As he approached his brother, he bowed to the ground 7 times before him. And Esau ran to meet him, embraced him, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him. And they both wept. Jacob said to Esau, "What a relief to see your friendly smile. It is like seeing the face of God. Please take this gift I have brought to you, for God has been very gracious to me." At least with the brothers, it's a happy ending. Esau, after 20 years, bears no ill will. Esau has prospered himself. And the hatchet is buried. Encounter 3 is Genesis 25 and 35. Genesis 35, excuse me. Then God said to Jacob, "Get ready and move to Bethel," same spot where he encountered God the first time. "Settle there. Build an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." So Jacob told everyone in his household, "Get rid of all your pagan idols. Purify yourselves. Put on clean clothing." By the way, this is from the I'll go way back to the first couple of weeks. JEDP. This is from the priestly source of Genesis. The priests want to make sure that you know that way back then they were already getting lined up to obey the law properly. Get rid of all these idols. Put on your clean clothes. We are now going to Bethel, where I will build an altar to the God who answered my prayers when I was in distress. He has been with me wherever I have gone. Jacob built an altar there and named the place El Bethel, which means God of Bethel, because God had appeared to him when he was fleeing from his brother Esau. Now that Jacob had returned, God appeared to him again at Bethel. God blessed him, saying, "Your name is Jacob," and this is the repetition that you often see in Genesis and in the prophets to reiterate a point. Your name is Jacob, but you will not be called Jacob any longer. From now on, your name will be Israel. So God renamed him Israel. Then God said, I am El Shaddai, God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. You will become a great nation, even many nations. Kings will be among your descendants. And I will give you the land I once gave to Abraham and Isaac. I will give it to you and your descendants after you. Then God went up from the place where he had spoken to Jacob. It's the same covenant that he has made with his father and grandfather. That last sentence I find really interesting. I'd like to spend about a year thinking about it. Then God went up from the place. Like a physical appearance of some sort that Jacob sees him leave. That goes back to some questions we've had throughout this study. How did God come to these folks? Was it a dream? Was it a vision? It was real, but we can't really say exactly what it looked like. So Jacob has come full circle. He left his home country via Bethel on the run. He comes back to Bethel, a changed man, changed name. Decades later, full family, and the direction of his life has changed. It's a great story. It doesn't sort out always. Well, how could God bless him after everything he had done wrong? That's the point. The point will be that God has chosen him out of grace, not because Jacob was the finest and the greatest, because he certainly wasn't. Questions real quick. All right. The extended family of Jacob. Now we're going to have to backtrack just a little bit here. Yes. So the question that Doug has asked for those online is that what does Muhammad and Islam do with this story? Because they often reverse Isaac and Ishmael. In fact, in Islam, it is Ishmael on the altar at Mount Moriah, not Isaac, that God intervenes to save, establishing that pedigree. They essentially call Jacob a prophet, the way that they respect the prophets, but they go with Esau as he marries Ishmael's daughter. He marries his cousin and reinforces what we would say today the Arabic line in lineage. Again, how you tell the story. So they center the story on Ishmael, and that allows that to marginalize the Jacob story. We'll back up real quick. Jacob is sent away for his own safety to Rebekah's brother Laban. Jacob lives with him and works for him. He falls madly in love while he is there with Laban's daughter, which would also be his cousin. Her name is Rachel. That wasn't unusual for the time. It's not unusual in some parts of this country to this day. Anyway, I'll let that one go by. He asked for her hand in marriage, and Laban is willing to arrange the marriage on one condition. Jacob will have to work for him for 7 years. Work for me for 7 years, and you can marry my daughter. And this is how it goes in Genesis 29. Now, Laban had 2 daughters. The older daughter was named Leah, and the younger was Rachel. I love this. There was no sparkle in Leah's eyes, but Rachel had a beautiful figure and a lovely face. It's the pretty girl. Since Jacob was in love with Rachel, he told her father, I'll work for you for 7 years if you'll give me Rachel, your younger daughter, as my wife. Agreed. I'd rather give her to you than anyone else. Stay and work with me. So Jacob worked 7 years to pay for Rachel, but his love for her was so strong that it seemed to him but a few days. So the wedding feast is thrown. The family celebrates. The newlywed couple consummates their marriage. And then the morning after, we read, Jacob woke up in the morning, and it was Leah. Talking about dark burlap sack tents. What have you done to me? Jacob raged at Laban. I worked 7 years for Rachel. Why have you tricked me? And by the way, the word trick in Hebrew there is Jacob. Right? It's not our custom here to marry off a younger daughter ahead of our firstborn, Laban replied. But wait until the bridal week is over, then we'll give you Rachel too, provided you promise to work another 7 years for me. And so Jacob agreed to work 7 more years. So 14 years to get the woman of his dreams. And he's got her scorned older sister too. And the rivalry is almost unbearable. I'm going to show you a chart in a minute, not quite yet. So here are the names. Leah, as the oldest, begins to give birth first. Hold up on that one. She begins to give birth first. Her firstborn is named Reuben. The name Reuben means the Lord has seen my misery. How would you like to carry that one around your whole life? Her second-born son, Simeon, the Lord has heard that I am not loved. Levi, the third son, at last my husband will become attached to me. Rachel was unable to have children, so to compete with her sister, she gives her servant Bilhah to Jacob as a wife. Remember the whole Hagar, Abraham thing? History repeats itself. So she gives Jacob Bilhah, and here are the meaning of some of Bilhah's sons' named by Rachel. She births them, but Rachel names them. Dan means God has vindicated me. And Naphtali means I have struggled with my sister and I have won. And now Leah can no longer have children. She refuses to be outdone. So she gives to Jacob her maidservant Zilpah. And he takes her into his bed, and the sons she produces are named Gad and Asher. Both names literally mean, how happy am I? And then finally, Rachel, the true love of Jacob, gives birth to a young son that they named Joseph. And then she gives him one more son, her last act. Genesis 35, beginning at verse number 16. Rachel went into labor. Her labor pains were intense. After a very hard delivery, the midwife finally exclaimed, "Don't be afraid, you have another son." And she's dying in childbirth. Rachel was about to die, but with her last breath, she named her baby Ben-Oni, which means son of my sorrow. Jacob, the baby's father, however, called him Benjamin, which means son of my right hand. So Rachel died and was buried at Bethlehem. So go back to that next slide, that other slide, if you would. Here are the 12 sons of Jacob produced by his 2 wives and his 2 concubine wives. Leah gives birth to the oldest of the boys, Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. And then Dan and Naphtali come along. That's with Rachel's servant girl. She claims those as her own. And then we go back to Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Then we go back over to Gad and to Asher. And then finally Rachel gives birth to the last 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. So, You want to talk about a dysfunctional family? One husband, 12 sons, 4 wives. 2 of the wives are sisters. And you think your family's crazy, right? This is crazy. I mean, it's just insanity. And it'll play out next week when we talk about Joseph, the final major character of Genesis. Now, these are real close to the 12 tribes of Israel, but not quite there. If you look on your far right-hand side, Levi is not granted territory in Israel when Israel takes over the land, because the tribe of Levi will be the priest and the temple workers. So they won't take possession of they won't be farmers. They will be the clergy. So they don't take a portion of the promised land. Joseph does not take a portion of the promised land either, because his last act, because Joseph suffers so much hardship at the hand of his brothers. And we'll talk about that next week. That Jacob adopts Joseph's 2 sons as his own, and they get inserted into the 12 tribes of Israel. And those 2 sons are Manasseh and Ephraim. Genesis 48. Do you have that text? Did I give it to you? Or are we out? No more slides? Here we go. Okay, good. Word came to Joseph, your father is failing rapidly. So Joseph went to visit his father, this is Jacob, and he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. When Joseph arrived, Jacob was told, your son Joseph has come to see you. So Jacob gathered his strength, sat up in his bed. Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me in Luz in the land, that's Bethel, land of Canaan, and blessed me. He said to me, I will make you fruitful, and I will multiply your descendants. I will make you a multitude of nations, and I will give this land of Canaan to your descendants after you as an everlasting possession. Now, I am claiming as my own sons these 2 boys of yours, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born here in the land of Egypt before I arrived. They will be my sons, just as Reuben and Simeon are. So he's saying, I'll take my grandsons and elevate them to the place of firstborns. And so they take Joseph's spot and they take Levi's spot to round out the 12 tribes of Israel. And I didn't have time to include it for you here, but Jacob then blesses the 2 boys. Manasseh is the oldest and Ephraim is the youngest. And when he goes to bless them, that wily Jacob all the way to the end. He takes his right hand and he crosses over and he puts the birthright blessing on the youngest son. And Joseph sees what's happening and stops him and he says, no, Father, this is the oldest one. And he said, I know which one is the oldest one. It's that underdog. Get the little guy, the runt of the litter, the smallest. He'll be the toughest. He'll be the one that will carry the name forward. That's all throughout the Old Testament. It's just a theme. And it's written for folks who are trying to survive. All right, questions? Right. Yeah, in the book of Revelation, the original names are called, and it's symbolic language because the 10 tribes of Israel. I'll leap forward here. So if we were to leap forward to the time of David and Solomon, the golden age of Israel, the 12 tribes living in relative peace in Palestine, or what would become Roman Palestine. Israel has a civil war. 10 tribes constitute the northern kingdom. Judah and Benjamin constitute the southern kingdom. The 10 tribes to the north were obliterated by the Assyrians. They were exterminated. Those that remained intermarried with the Assyrians and became the Samaritans. And the Samaritans were more hated than anybody else because they were regarded as half-breeds. So you only have 2 tribes left by the time that the tribes come back from Babylon. You have the descendants of Judah and the descendants of Benjamin. Now, let's get right at this underdog story. Benjamin is the baby boy of the 12 tribes of Israel. The last born, and barely born as his mother died giving him birth. Do you see the underdog story? That's the point all along. To survive. And if you look at Jewish history from that perspective, then you see it. I talked about it Sunday. Chutzpah. You can't have chutzpah and be the big man in charge. You got to be the little guy. You got to be the underdog in order to have that kind of moxie. And that's what's instilled to them. Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you. Thank you. It's that great blessing that the mothers of the 12 tribes, even though their rivalry was intense, the generations that would come would look back on them with great affection. I mean, they gave birth to the nation. Would have been a very difficult tent to live in, but they did give birth to a nation. One more question in the back. Thank you. Oh yeah, he had a whole host of daughters, but in those times it didn't matter. It didn't count. And there are places there where it says, and his daughters. He could have had 40 daughters. But they were not eligible to be recognized or to receive birthright. One more question in the back.
Hello?
Yes.
1, 2, 3, check. We have a couple online questions. Why does God change names of people in the Old Testament?
The change of name designates a change of direction. Abram becomes Abraham because Abram is a Semitic name from Mesopotamia. It means father. Abraham means father of many. The little change with Sarai to Sarah is a very similar change. Jacob, that change is from, swindler to overcomer, for lack of a better. That's a massive change. To be able to say my name is Israel is a whole lot better than saying my name is Jacob. I mean, Jacob's a great name. If you named your kid Jacob, I'm glad you did. But in Hebrew at the time, it wasn't necessarily flattering to do that. And then in the New Testament, you have the Saul to Paul, which is not so much that God changed the name as much as Saul is a Hebrew name and Paul is the Greek equivalent of the name. So as Paul went to the Gentiles, he took on the Greek-sounding name rather than the Hebrew-sounding name.
And then the second question is, what, if any, does ladder have for our own spiritual development?
The question was, what does Jacob's ladder have for our own spiritual development? It's a great story. I don't doubt it one bit. It's particularly powerful in that Jacob came back to that same spot, and it establishes Bethel more than it does anything else as a sacred space. And we could tease that out in 100 different directions. I don't I don't believe in sacred space in the same way that Augustine did. And what I mean by that is the only sacred space, the only church is you. You and you and you. Paul would say, don't you know that your body is a temple of the Lord? And I've always said, we did not know that, Paul, till you said it. And so, I don't worry about sacred tables or the sacristy or this. I've gotten in a lot of trouble in my life for, violating the sacred tools and I don't believe that. You are sacred. Humans are sacred. You are the possession of God and you are the temple of God, okay? So I don't believe in sacred space like that. But I do believe that there are special places that you probably could name 2 or 3 that when you go there, it's as if God is there with you. And it's probably not a building. Probably not. Yeah, it could be anywhere. So I think that does communicate. God is talking to all these patriarchs and meeting them where they are. There are no sacred buildings built yet of any kind. They might build an altar to commemorate something, but they don't say we need to build a church or a synagogue or a temple here. God is here in this space.
Yes, but in a couple of stories, he denied that being done of the people trying to get to him or make a place.
Yes, Sarah's right. There are times God stood in the way. Yeah, yeah. Don't build that Tower of Babel, which is to. And he prohibited David from building the temple. He pushed it off as far as he could. But people wanted that sacred space, and that's understandable. The Jewish people were able to adapt quite well eventually, even after they lost their temple. There's no Jewish temple today. What did the Jewish people do? They go to synagogue now, but that's a brand new creation. That was never a part of the Mosaic intention. Jews don't sacrifice animals anymore. They adapted the faith based on what was available to them, recognizing what I've just said, that what is sacred is God's presence in you as a person. That's what is sacred, not a building or a place or a ritual or a rite. Sounds like heresy in some places. I better be quiet about that. But
No, but like 90 years ago, we were taught that there was a sacred place.
oh, sure, I understand. And I was.
It's hard to overcome that.
Right.
It just is.
It is hard to overcome. It is hard to overcome. And one thing that helps us is that if you go, and I know you can stop the broadcast if you want, if folks are gone. Hey, bye everybody. We're just going to chat here and finish up. Next week, Joseph, here's what we're going to do next week. Bring your questions. Even if back at session 1, session 2, if you don't want to ask it, write it down and hand it to Garrett. If you want to hide, that's great. Garrett will ask it. And so I'm going to try to take some time for questions, and we'll talk about Joseph.